Over to you, Tracy.
Hi, a pleasant good morning, Pamela. Thank you. A pleasant good morning to everyone. First, allow me to greet Honorable Dolores Valderramos Garcia, Minister of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Her Excellency Ambassador Marianne Van Steen, Head of the European Union Delegation to Jamaica, Belize, Turks and Caicos Islands, Bahamas, and the Cayman Islands. Ms. Melissa Zuniga, the President of the Spotlight Initiative Civil Society National Reference Group, Chief Executive Officers from several line ministries, specifically Ms. Tanya Santos, Ministry of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Mr. Valentino Schall, Ministry of Rural Transformation, Community Development and Local Government, Mr. Jose Urbina, Ministry of Youth, Sports and E-Governance, Ms. Diane Castillo Mejia, Ministry of Education, Culture and Technology, Mr. Kevin Arters, Ministry of Home Affairs and New Growth Industries. I also greet Ms. Thea Garcia Ramirez, President of the National Women's Commission, Ms. Santry Sandiford, Representative of the Special Envoy for the Development of Families and Children, our very own Ms. Alison Parker, the UNICEF representative, Mr. Ian King, UNDP Deputy Representative, as well as Ms. Tisa Grant, the UNFPA Liaison Officer for the Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean, other government officials, members of the Spotlight Initiative Civil Society National Reference Group, UN staff and colleagues, and other participants. A very warm welcome and thank you for joining this virtual launch of the Spotlight Initiative Baseline Study Report. I am Tracy Hutchinson, the Strategic Planner and Team Leader in the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, and I will be moderating the presentation for this launch today. The Spotlight Initiative is a global partnership launched since September 2017 between the United Nations and the European Union to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. This initiative has deployed investments in over 25 countries across Latin America, Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Pacific, providing a unique opportunity to demonstrate that a significant, concerted, and comprehensive investment in gender equality can make a transformative difference in the lives of women and girls. Since January 2020, the Spotlight Initiative has been under implementation in Belize, under the leadership of the Ministry of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, with financial support from the European Union and in partnership with the United Nations. Led by the United Nations Resident Coordinator, Ms. Birgit Gastenberg, and 3 recipient United Nations entities: the United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, and the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. This program in Belize seeks to contribute to ending family violence by strengthening policies and legislations that will guarantee increased protection of women and girls, build capacity of state and non-state actors to respond to family violence, expanding the range of services available and addressing social norms and behaviors that promote violence against women and girls. Today, our objectives are to present the findings of the baseline study, hear from you as active participants on how we can use this data to inform and shape the future planning of programs and interventions, and to discuss its implications for policies and programs to strengthen Belize's response to violence against women and girls. This baseline study assessment covers key metrics related to Spotlight Initiative's results as articulated in its results framework, as well as capturing perceptions and norms of women and men related to violence against women and girls, and family violence as collected during the period 2019 and 2020. It presents data that can be used to measure impact both during and after the implementation of the program, and to be used to further develop and/or adapt the design of the program and target interventions.
In our
I'm
last
sorry,
meeting,
we have a microphone that's bent. I kindly ask all participants
we are figuring it out.
to kindly mute your microphones. Thank you kindly. And as I was saying, that the presentation of the data today will allow for us to assess and use to measure impact both during and after the implementation of the program, as well as to further develop and/or adapt the program and target interventions based on the data and analysis. Before I invite our speakers to provide the official opening remarks, I kindly ask that you join for the national anthem of Belize. Colleagues, can you kindly accompany us with the anthem? I don't think we have the audio, Perla.
Yes, bear with me 1 second.
Okay, great. Just making sure that we're connected.
Caribbean Sea, manhood be pledged to thy liberty. Tyrants here linger, despots must flee. Will haven of democracy. The blood of our sons flows the sun, glory of the friendly aggressions, of truth. Or shall we be yours onward? Arise, ye sons of the big man's clan. Put on your armor, clear the land, drive back the tyrants, despots flee. Land of the free by the Caribbean Sea. Nature has blessed thee. With wealth untold, mountains and valleys where breweries roll. Fathers dependent, valiant and bold, the back invader this heritage hold. From Riohondo to Old Sarstown, Coral Isle over Blue Lagoon. Keep watch with the angels, the stars and moon, for freedom comes tomorrow's noon. Ye sons of the Ben's clan, put on your armor, clear the land, drive back the tyrants, let the despots free. Land of the free by the Caribbean Sea.
Thank you very much, Perla, for facilitating us with the national anthem. It gives me great pleasure to now introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Marianne Van Steen, Head of the European Union Delegation to Belize, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Turks and Caicos, and the Cayman Islands. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. And good morning to everyone. Honorable Dolores Valderramos Garcia, Minister of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs. Mrs. Melissa Zuniga, President of the Civil Society National Reference Group. Dear authorities, I've understood that there are many authorities present from the Belizean government. I greet you and I greet all the UN colleagues present as well as EU colleagues present today, everyone who is connected. Good morning, I'm very happy that there is such a large participation to this launching of the Spotlight Initiative Baseline Study. I'm actually always pleased when I can participate in events that mark the achievement of milestones under the Spotlight Initiative, because I do believe that this program, in addressing a matter which is vital for the survival of many, it is invaluable to question the status quo around the acceptance of power imbalances around gender, violence as a culture, and family violence in particular. I understand from my colleagues that while we were scoping the Spotlight Initiative, initially Belize and actually a number of other Caribbean countries as well, was supposedly not in need of the program because of data showing a relatively low level of family violence and violence against women and girls in Belize. But we unfortunately know that reality is different and that there is, sadly enough, a high rate of family violence in the country, but indeed that there is a significant lack of data. And I'm very pleased that I think thanks to the persistence of many of the UN and EU colleagues, in the end, it was indeed decided to include Belize as one of the beneficiary countries under the Spotlight project program. And I'm also very happy that indeed today we do have data, and that that is indeed one of the milestones of the Spotlight initiative in Belize. But I'm not so happy to see the content of those data. And I'd like to give you just one example. Apparently, in this very year, in 2021, 11.2% of those who were, sorry, who were asked the question, they do think that a man still has the right to sort of beat his wife. I mean, these are figures that are shocking, and I think it is very necessary that we accelerate our efforts to change beliefs and subcultures, and that addressing violence against women and girls is really of utmost urgency. Through the provision of this recent and relevant data from this baseline study, as was said by Pamela before, we do very much believe that Belizean decision makers, policy makers, service providers, I mean, everyone who is involved in this, in the working on this matter, have now access to improved evidence-based information. And we do expect indeed that this will lead to sound gender policies and programs adequately costed and efficiently implemented. It is only through the use of accurate data that you can actually reach results with the programs that we're implementing. I firmly believe, and I have already noted, that the Spotlight initiative as well, in Belize in particular, is providing an excellent opportunity to bring together different partners, to bring together the European Union, the United Nations, the government of Belize, the authorities, the civil society, and that all of them together, working together through the best use of the funding available and through our collective expertise, will contribute to produce targeted solutions and actually come forward with targeted actions within communities that will change the lives of many existing and also potential victims. We do recognize a significant value to be achieved from this baseline study, but not just for the professionals, more indeed for those who are the victims, who are maybe victims in the future. I'm going to conclude by, if you allow me, taking this opportunity to thank again our UN colleagues for the excellent work which they have and are showing here today. I'm very much looking forward to the benefits to be derived from this baseline study for all that are in need or that may be in need in the future. Congratulations and thank you so much for your interest in this, and I wish you a very fruitful conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Van Steen, for those kind words of encouragement. And indeed, we look forward to the exchange today and look forward to continuing the important discussion around the availability of data to inform policy action. And so it gives me pleasure to now introduce Honorable Dolores Balderramos Garcia, Minister of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, to kindly join and share her remarks. Minister, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Greetings, Your Excellency Van Steen. Greetings, Mrs. Zuniga. Greetings to everyone joining us this morning. Here in Belize, even if the temperature goes down just a little, we consider it to be our winter. So it's much more pleasant when you don't have to be sweating all the time. Thank you, partners, for joining us this morning. It's a big raft of persons that we have today. I'm very pleased once more to participate in this important type of event. And of course, the presentation of the baseline study report for data is exceedingly important. I want to say that I had a few little notes prepared for me, which I will refer to, but I just want to say what a good thing it is for us to continue this very, very important work of the Spotlight Initiative. From my prepared notes, I can say that we had, between January and August of 2021, 522 cases of domestic violence reported to the Belize Police Department, an increase of about 50 cases over the same period of January to August of 2020. So we see that it is going up in terms of what is reported. Now, it is important to note, as we all would, that this still does not give us a truly accurate picture, because many people report to other institutions, many go to the Women and Family Support Department or health centers, that kind of thing. So not everything comes to the attention of the police. And of course, we have cases that go completely unreported. So it is important, as we are going to be noting today, to increase and harmonize the data that is presented to us, so that we can use it not only for accurate information, but also for planning purposes. That, I think, is the main point that we wish to make today. So there is a great need for the harmonization of data to inform our ongoing work. And I'd also like to mention that the National Gender Policy seeks to successfully harmonize the multi-sectoral response to gender-based violence in our country. And now, through the support of the Spotlight Initiative, there is the ongoing consultancy with our ministry to strengthen our case management information system, which is called FamCare, of course, to provide the pathway for agencies to document and analyze data on violence against women and girls and family violence. So now, with the insertion of the human trafficking aspect to the dashboard of FamCare, we are able to continue the work and to strengthen the work that is absolutely needed. I want to pause, gentle people, to say that we had, as I believe, a successful meeting last week focusing on trafficking in persons through the sponsorship of our partners, the Human Trafficking International, and we had key persons attend that trafficking in persons session, which is absolutely seeking to increase and to strengthen our collaboration. And so if the information on trafficking in persons is brought into the FamCare, then I think it can only inure to all our benefit. So I wanted to pause to say that all the work is related, and I'm particularly happy that we could have that trafficking aspect being brought now into the FamCare initiative and the case management system. Now, strengthening the gender-based violence case management system, it's going to improve coordination in data collection and management, and it will allow for broader trend analysis, referring to my notes, which will in turn improve the delivery of critical services to women and girls. Proper use of data on violence against women and girls can also empower survivors, of course. And by effectively presenting gender-based violence as a national public health issue, women and girls will understand that they're not alone, and it may even encourage other survivors to report their cases and access to critical services. I wish also colleagues to refer to a very good article that I was reading from the Jamaica Gleaner yesterday, written by a consultant to the Spotlight Initiative in Jamaica. Her name is Tanya Chambers. And basically what she was saying is that what is really needed to expand programs targeting sexually abused children.
The ghost? I'm the ghost?
What is really needed is interventions, law reform, and cultural change. So expanding programs that will target sexually abused children for psychosocial intervention and therapeutic care is very important. So sexual violence against children is everybody's business. So I wanted to share that because the consultant works for the Spotlight Initiative. And of course, the violence against women and girls includes the sexual abuse of minors and children. So I really wanted to say that across our region, interventions are taking place and we're trying to strengthen our work together. Now to wrap up, since I'm given 5 minutes, I think, and I'm getting there, let's move towards better collaboration and more action, and creating practical, ethical, and culturally sensitive systems to quantify the abuses that are so destructive to the lives of girls and women. And of course, to act on that information to assist survivors and prevent future violence. So looking at it then, dear colleagues, we are expressing, just to wrap up the theme, we are expressing how data will allow government to administrate and execute our delivery of services, of course, government and civil society, all our partners, and additionally, it will help us in addressing the ways in which data will inform our ongoing and future programming on gender-related issues. So once again, everybody, I want to thank you. I repeat my government's commitment, our government's commitment. I thank you for tuning in and joining us and participating in this important meeting this morning. And let's look carefully at what is presented, and then let us commit ourselves to act on it in positive ways. Thank you for allowing me that space, Tracy. And once again, greetings, Her Excellency, all our civil society partners, government and non-government, and of course our EU partners and all our United Nations partners as well. Thank you for that opportunity, and I will stay keenly in tune, and let us wish each other, and once more, a successful meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Valderramas, for those words, demonstrating your personal commitment and leadership to the importance of data and of the many initiatives being led by your ministry, both with the support of the Spotlight Initiative, as well as other key important actions that the government is undertaking to address violence against women and girls, and how it impacts on everyone's lives. It now gives me pleasure to introduce Ms. Melissa Zuniga, the President of the Spotlight Initiative Civil Society National Reference Group, to share her remarks. Ms. Zuniga, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. A wonderful good morning to one and all, and greetings from the Civil Society National Reference Group. Ms. Birgit Gerstenberg, UN Resident Coordinator, Belize and El Salvador, Honorable Dolores Valderramas Garcia, Minister of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Her Excellency, Ms. Marianne Van Steen, Head of the EU Delegation to Jamaica, Belize, Turks and Caicos Islands, Bahamas, and the Cayman Islands, recipient UN organizations, UNDP, UNICEF, UNFPA, my esteemed colleagues of the CSNRG, or the Civil Society National Reference Group, friends, colleagues, and other special invited guests. The Spotlight Initiative Civil Society National Reference Group is pleased to be a part of the launch of the Baseline Study Report. As stated by Carla Fiorina, former CEO of HP, the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. It is important to analyze the key findings, discuss the implications for policies and programs to strengthen Belize's response to eliminating violence against women and girls, and to ensure that all the various groups of persons impacted, particularly the most marginalized, are included and benefit from the response programs and other interventions. Here in Belize, and especially with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we continue to see the media report on horrendous acts of violence committed against our women and girls. We are hopeful and enthusiastic that the data and the findings that are going to be presented today, which falls under the key activities under Pillar 5, establishment of baseline data to further inform Spotlight interventions, will address the need for meaningful plans of action at the grassroots, indigenous, and community levels. I close with a quote from Alex Peiniger. In the end, you should only measure and look at the numbers that drive action, meaning that the data tells you what to do next. Let us use the information shared here today to determine the way forward to realizing our goal under Spotlight Initiative, which is eliminating violence against women and girls and engaging men and boys. With that, I close, and I thank you all for the opportunity to make these remarks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zuniga, for sharing those remarks on behalf of the Civil Society Reference Group, which has been very integral at participating in the conduct of this study as a part of the steering committee and throughout the overall implementation of this program. We're very grateful for that partnership. And now, colleagues, we now move to the first substantive item on the agenda this morning, which is for us to receive an overview of the baseline study. And so I now invite my colleague, Paulette Wade, the Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist from UNICEF Country Office here in Belize, to present the overview of the study. Paulette, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I do believe that Perla is managing the screen, okay? Right, so good morning, everyone. I've been given a task to, as best as possible, bring to you what are some key findings for the baseline study. For me, it's always a pleasure to bring data that informs programming and guides the decisions that we are making. Again, as Minister Dolores mentioned, data and having the right evidence is sometimes a challenge for us. And so today is very historic because we now have baseline data on violence in the families, at least for us to have this picture of what is exactly happening in Belize and how we can adjust ourselves accordingly. So the presentation this morning is in at least 4 segments, looking at the background. I'll do that briefly as Tracy did that already, looking at what was the structure of the team that ensured the quality of this data that is produced, looking at what was the baseline of this assessment, understanding that while it is an indicator on Pillar 5, it also supported the data that is needed for all pillars. Looking at the methodology, as is always asked, you know, how was this research approached? And so to understand and unpack that, looking at some of the key findings and then some of the recommendations and conclusion. This presentation was done, I want to say jointly, from our consulting partners, IMC, along with the steering committee and myself, and of course with the Perla putting the magic touch as communication. So next slide, please. Okay, as mentioned, in 2017, the Spotlight initiative started with the vision of both the European Union and UNICEF, looking at how to reduce or eliminate the forms of violence against women and girls, not only in Belize, but worldwide. And so we are thankful that Belize is also a part of this. This also aims to ensure that we keep our government's commitment to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As mentioned, the study also provides the values for indicators where the data was missing in order to guide the response in general. Next slide, please. And so what we had in terms of structure, we had both a management team and a technical team. While UNICEF had the oversight, there were 3 other partners that assisted in ensuring that the data was relevant and the quality was consistent throughout. And so we had a consultant, the IMC Worldwide, that supported the data collection. Within that unit, there was an assessment supervisor, there was an assessment team that looked at the qualitative aspect, and then the knowledge survey was actually done by the Statistical Institute of Belize. For all data collection, it's always good to have a steering committee to ensure that the quality is there in terms of reviewing of the questionnaires, reviewing of the report, and guiding in terms of trying to ensure that we got the participants to participate in the questionnaires, because it was done over the phone. And so then that committee was represented by the National Commission for Families and Children, National Women's Commission, the National AIDS Commission. We also had the RUNOs there. If you notice, it's blank because they're also a part of the National Steering Committee. We also had civil society represented by PETAL. So all that will be presented here also represent the hard work that went in ensuring the quality of the survey. Next slide, please. So basically, there are 4 objectives for this baseline study. The baseline study was to provide the information, to set milestones and target, and develop work plan in line of the principle of leaving no one behind and reaching those farthest left behind. It was also to complete the result framework. As I mentioned before, while the baseline study was an indicator, it is also to provide the information for the relevant pillars. It's also has as its objective to inform the strategic decision-making and refining the programs as we go along, and to ensure that the communication reach those who are furthest left behind. Also to provide recommendations on the areas that needs more attention and focus during the implementation, and looking at ways to strengthen performance monitoring and maximize learning. Next slide, please. So when we look at the approach and the methodology, it is basically unpacked into 4 key areas. And the 4 slides that follow this, I will basically give you a summary of what each of these are. So the first one we wanted to ensure, it's at the bottom. It says that it was built on the initiative methodological notes. And so we're guided by experiences from other countries. There was also a desk review and key informant interviews that were done to get different views and viewpoints of our stakeholders. And we call that our data source. There were key questions and texts that were answered. And then there was the data collection tool that was done. Next slide, please. And so looking at the data collection tools, we saw that there was a knowledge, attitude, belief, and practice, the CAP study. This was done at household level via phones, because at the time of the data collection, as you know, we were under restrictions, movement restrictions because of COVID. There were also key informant interviews as well. There were key stakeholders that we felt were very much engaged in reducing family violence, and those persons were actually interviewed by phone on various aspects, looking at legal and policy framework, the organization capacity, oversight mechanisms that exist, data systems, strategies, program initiative, and advocacy and campaign efforts. A desk review of secondary data was also done. This was done looking online, as you know, it's the first place we search now. Also, documents were put together by UNICEF and the other RUNAs. And of course, as mentioned, the key informant interviews. Next slide, please. So when we look at the knowledge, attitudes, and belief and practices, there were 3 different focus. We looked at getting information at household level from men and women aged 18 to 49, service providers, and as well caregivers. And so this data together then fed into this CAP study and what we will understand coming up. Next slide, please. The key informant interviews then looked, as I mentioned, at the legal framework. So persons were questioned on whether or not they have knowledge of the legal framework that looks at family violence, whether or not there was an understanding or the level of awareness of the human rights standards, obligation, and capacity of the Women Against Violence, the policies, data, and services. So we asked people whether or not they were knowledgeable of these things and how to access them. Next slide, please. So in terms of the sample, the key informant interviews, of the 50, we got 48 of those interviews done, which is very good. And in terms of the actual household survey, initially we had looked at 700 to 900 households, and we were only discussing targeting Belize and the Cayo district. However, because of us having to do the interviews over the phone, it gave us a better, it gives us the opportunity then to be able to expand to the 6 districts. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of ethical consideration, as you know, data, we must always be guided by ethical recommendations. And so we were also guided by WHO safety and ethical recommendation for researching violence against women and girls, and as well the UNG ethical guidelines for evaluation. This was because we knew of the sensitive data, and we know that at that time, many persons were at home, and so we didn't want to do any harm in terms of collecting data. There were consents that were done, whether or not it was during the survey itself, the CAP study, and also while doing the survey, if there were sensitive questions, then you know that there had to be another consent to be able to do this. If you notice that the age range was at 18 to ensure that all persons who responded were considered adults and not children. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of quality assurance then, as mentioned, quality assurance was done at 3 different levels. There was a reference group that was mentioned that gave oversight in their inputs. They technically reviewed the assessment, the design of that assessment, the tools, and those protocols. We had the IMC team who actually did the preparation in terms of the manual and the protocols for the study, the consent form, and ensuring the safeguarding and reporting of the data. SIB also supported in terms of then taking those manual and actually training the enumerators. And this was done real time and over the virtually, I should say. Next slide, please. Okay, as mentioned, there were some limitations because of the COVID-19. As you know, because it was done via phone, only respondents with phones could actually participate. Because we know that the respondents were in their homes and maybe they could not go to a private part of their homes to answer the question, it limited the capacity to be able to answer, to be able to ask very sensitive questions. We had to restrict the survey to ensure that, as mentioned before, that we were that the respondents were adults. So we looked at 18 years to 49 years. Also, we note that there had to be recalls. As you know, not all the time when you set dates and interviews for the respondent that they were available. Sometimes they get to work, different meetings came up, and so we had to recall over and over again until we got the 48 of the 50 persons responding. There was very limited available data and documentation on violence against women and girls, but we know this already. However, as with the limitation came opportunities. Because we were restricted by phone, it meant that we could expand the sample size. Because we were restricted by phone, it meant that we could actually reach all districts. And so it gave a better we gave enough data to be able to triangulate with the secondary data that was collected. It wasn't a lot, but there were information on gender-based violence that could be used right across the board. So next slide, please. Okay, so now looking at the findings and looking at the respondents to see whether or not we were accurately represented in terms of the response. So if we notice there, we had slightly more females than males participating in this survey. Of those persons then, 190 of those reported as having a disability. There were more persons in the urban area, almost 3 times as much than the rural areas responding. And if you notice by age range, the most persons answering and participating in the survey were 25 years and older. Next slide, please. In terms of the respondents by location, if you notice on the screen there, Corozal had the most persons participated, and then Belize had the lowest. In terms of ethnicity then, there were more Hispanic persons answering the survey. It was about 701, followed by Creole, which was 207, and then East Indian was the least. There was a group that considered themselves mixed, and they were about 78 persons considered themselves mixed. Next slide, please. So when we look at the findings hereafter, we are going to look at them according to their pillars and what was found. So when we look at the policy and legislative framework, what was concluded was there was no specific legislation in place to address the full scope of violence against women and girls. There were, however, different policies that address parts of it. When we look at the Social Offense Act of 1991, there is a Domestic Violence Act, was 1992, and then it had 2 versions of reform, 2000 and 2007. Protection Against Sexual Harassment Act of 2003. The Criminal Code revised in 2000. There is also the National Labor Policy from 2019, Gender Protocol for Judiciary, which is 2019, and Cyber Crime Bill of 2020. The National Gender-Based Plan of Action it goes until 2020. However, we still feel that this document is still relevant. And so while the end date is there, I think that the actions within the plan is still relevant to the work that we are doing currently. Next slide, please. Pillar 2 then looks at the institutional strengthening. And what was noticed again, there were inconsistency from the government stakeholders regarding identification of a single entity that has the function. So not only isn't there a single document or a single policy, also when we look at the framework to ensure that there is this institutional capacity to be able to deliver on violence against women and girls, we notice that there isn't one significant entity. However, this is basically divided among several entities, most of which is under the Ministry of Human Development. And we saw the Women's Commission coming out, the National Commission for Families and Children. There is also the Gender and Gender-Based Violence Committee, Women's Department, and some people also felt that the Special Envoy for Women and Children had some mechanisms there to address violence against women and girls, and then the Domestic Violence Unit of the police. Next slide, please. Also, in terms of the institutional strengthening, looking at the desk review, there is a very low integration in Belize development plans across sector. So while we might have a reference of to address violence against women and girls, what we note is that there is very low integration. There are several coordinated efforts, as was mentioned before, when we look at national plans, some strategy and programming around violence against women and girls and family violence in Belize. We saw those being addressed in some few documents like the new adolescent health strategy. And this was a strategy that has not yet been launched, but completed its support of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports, and other key actors. 31 of the entities interviewed reported, 21 reported having strategic plans and programs on preventing violence against women and girls and family violence. So I think that from that perspective, that it's relatively high. I know there are 10 entities that don't, but still it's work in progress. We can build on those and then move forward. In terms of, next slide, good. Pillar 3, in terms of prevention, and I think this was also mentioned before as one alarming findings, that 11.2% of the persons who actually answered this survey, and we saw that that was about 1,249 persons, 11.2% gives us roughly about 145 persons, felt that it was still okay for a man to beat his partner for at least one of those circumstances. And when we talk about the circumstances, we are talking about burning of the food, speaking to another partner, and not taking care of the children. So those are some of the things that the recipients felt that it was okay to beat his partner. We noticed that, you know, there was only a little bit slightly more of the men who live in the rural areas felt that this was okay. And there was no significant difference when we look at it across age range. So the opinion was relatively consistent across the board. Next slide, please. And so when we looked at prevention under Pillar 3, we wanted to try to unpack what persons understood or consider family violence. So the question was asked, and the choices given were sexual violence against a female partner in the household, femicide, incest and rape of adolescent girls in the household, violence against a female partner in the household, violence against a child in the household. Now, if you notice and if you see the rectangles, they're of different color. The green represent male, this burgundy, female, urban, pink, slightly orange green was rural, and then the bright orange were persons with disability. But if you look at the size of the rectangles of each color, you will notice that they're almost all the same. So that represented about 85 on average or so of persons who considered all of these things to be acts of violence. So as we program, our response should look at how do we capture, how do we change the behaviors of the 15% who felt that it was okay. Any one of these were okay as were not considered, I should say, acts of violence, because if 15% felt that incest and rape against a girl in a household is not an act of violence, then I do believe that we have a lot of work to do. When we kind of unpack according to ethnicity, right across the board, you're going to see that persons who considered themselves of Mayan ethnicity scored the least. So it means that in some cases, when we look at addressing and overprogramming, we need to really address the Mayan communities and to ensure that the information is understood because of the language barrier. Next slide, please. Again, under prevention, we've noticed that stakeholders are often unavailable to specify whether or not the evidence exists. And some of the examples here that were given was kind of a mixture between evidence and different activities through the year. Because while the 16 days of activism is not a data capture moment, it's also a moment where the violence against women and girls is a key focus for those 16 days. There is also the the Transform Gender Day. Those are basically days and not, as I mentioned, data capture moment. The National Committee for Families and Children, there is also the Child's Friendly Spaces that they're looking at. The National Committee for Families and Children also supports through the Child Protection Committee, looking at the roadmap and addressing the roadmap to end child marriage and early union in Belize. National Women's Commission also have a hotline and a complaint mechanism that exists. And then there is also the national curriculum that was adopted 2020 to 2021. So there are several key moments and key opportunities to address the prevention of violence against women and girls. Next slide, please. Again, in prevention, what we saw was that 90% of those persons who did the CAP study were unaware of any community activities that address gender equality and rights of women and girls on SRH. And this was during the time frame 2019 to 2020. So that was the question asked during the year 2019 to 2020. Were you aware of any community activities? And so only 10% of those persons knew of activities. And so most of what we're doing is not reaching the public as we might think as we program. 92% of respondents were also unaware of any community activity that addressed violence in relationships between men and women and girls over the past year. So which means that only 8% of persons are aware. Again, for us to look at our communication messages when these activities are rolled out. Next slide, please. Looking again at Pillar 3 and looking at the quality of essential services, the respondents were asked, have you ever heard of any of the following support services available to survivors of violence and their families in their community? Shelter for girls and women, the male respondent, 12% of them knew that. That's about 500, and the total number of males who answered was 542, and females were 718. So you could see the very low percentage in terms of the shelters. The free legal assistance, again, about 14% of males and 16% of females knew of any free legal assistance services. Protection and restraining order, 56% of males knew and 60% of the female respondents knew. Emergency assistance, we saw that 36% of females knew, and 35% of males knew of that. Survivor support program, 17% males, 19% of the females knew of those existing. Counseling and psychosocial support, 32% of males knew, 34% of females knew. In terms of social workers, again, this was as much as in terms of the restraining order, 42% of males, and then 58% of females. In terms of dignity kit, 9% of males knew and 6% of females knew. And so again here, in terms of the services that are being provided, while the service might exist, the persons who should benefit from this service do not know of those existence. So it means that when we are offering these services, that we need to do more to ensure that the persons and the beneficiaries can access these services, but also know that the services are there for them. Next slide, please. And when we asked again, do you think that survivors of violence in your community know where to go? Again, you see there is a relatively low percentage of persons, it's under 50% know where to go. And that is by male or female. It doesn't really matter, because if you look at no and you add that to not sure, then you see that most persons don't know where to go, because you're talking about over 50% of persons not knowing where to go. In fact, for males, I think it's about 57%. They wouldn't know, because no and unsure is the same. Those are the persons we need to target as we roll out our intervention. Next slide, please. So again, when you look at quality of service, and this is reaction to domestic violence or family violence, 95% of both rural and urban women would take action if they witness or heard or learn that someone they knew was a victim of violence. So we know that people are ready to take action. They just need to know where and how. 56% of women stated that they would inform the police. This is very low in terms of response, and less than 1% of women stated that they would inform a health worker. Next slide, please. So we wanted to kind of unpack those numbers a bit, because again, we think that it was key as due to and persons responding, we need to understand or to share with you where the recipient felt more confident, or to which agency they felt more confident in reporting. And you'll see right across the board, whether or not it was the men or the women, they all felt comfortable reporting to the police. However, while it's more than 50% see the police as an agency that they would report to, 58% is very low. It means that almost half of the person will not report to the police. The next group that we saw that persons would report to, they would report to a family member. However, I think another moment would be to unpack to see whether or not the family member, after the person's report to them, would then take the necessary action to ensure that reporting happens. The least reporting would be the community health workers. So this is just to unpack to see where persons lie in terms of their confidence in terms of reporting. Very alarmingly though, the nurses and doctors as well scored very low. So the health systems, for some reason, victims do not see the health system as a system where they would approach to report violence. Next slide, please. When we look at data and evidence, again, as was mentioned earlier, there isn't one significant or one specific agency where the data is actually housed. And we know that this is a challenge regardless of whether or not we are looking at violence against women and girls and family violence, or we are looking at any indicator. One of the things that we're challenged by is to have a one entity that house all data across sectors. However, there's several different agencies that do have statistics, and the respondent were aware that those exist. The Belize Police Department, sexual offenses statistics. We also have the Ministry of Health, gender-based violence surveillance system, and then we know we have the Belize Crime Observatory. But again, here informants were not clear on how these systems integrate. They don't know who is responsible for the data. There's a little bit of, there's not much confidence in terms of the quality of data. And there was a concern in terms of the data and inconsistency in which the data is updated. There is no recent evidence of capacity building efforts in data management. We know that there have been some training that was done by the Belize Crime Observatory in 2020. However, this is one agency. There isn't a coordinated effort in terms of building a data management system, a one-stop shop for data within the country. So it is also an area of greatest need and effort if we are to ensure that data really guides the decision that we're making and support us in terms of delivery of results for children, then this is one area that we know really needs a collective focus and attention. Next slide, please. Okay, and so in terms of the conclusion, what were some of the recommendations coming out of the study? I think it's about 6 of them. And the first one, coming right off of the last slide, is that there is a need for a robust output data management system. We cannot really know whether or not you're achieving results if you're unable to monitor. And so this is one that is very much needed. It's number one. And one might say I put it first because I'm biased in this direction, because many times we are doing program, and yes, we are working so hard, but we cannot show, we cannot demonstrate how well we have done, or did we really hit the mark as we should, because the data doesn't exist. And so this is one area that is necessary. We need to ensure that the data is collected accurately, timely, and is disaggregated so that we can really ensure that we reach those who are left furthest behind. So in terms of recommendation, Spotlight initiative should ensure that there is a robust and practical ongoing monitoring strategy that is in place. And I believe that this is the first step, understanding where the data gaps exist and giving us moments to be able to measure the targets that we set, looking at key milestones and indicators across, and so that there is also an opportunity to ensure that there is a space for constant reporting and feedback, that those are in place. Next slide, please. Okay, reporting against standard indicators. As you know, that there are a few indicators within the Spotlight framework. And many of the progress indicators required, if you look at it, are quantitative data from stakeholders that may not be currently being collected. Because when you look at determining progress, progress can either mean direct impact, but there's some process indicators that are needed. And so the stakeholders that we engage in must have a system in place to continuously track these indicators. The methodological notes needs to be defined. Sometimes the indicators that are in the framework for some of the agencies, what we notice that they're very complex and very, very difficult to measure. And so it's sometimes difficult to kind of be able to report on those indicators because they're almost like index. They're not a single indicator. They're not specific enough. It's complex, and so then it's hard to measure. So one of the things is maybe that for those agencies that are a part and benefiting from the spotlight, that we look at creating a comprehensive monitoring framework to be able to address this. The spotlight should engage with technical specialists responsible for creating the result framework and methodological note to be able to obtain clarity and definitions in terms of those indicators so that they can be accurately measured in the future. So the recommendation here is to ensure that not only are those indicators standard across the different agencies benefiting from Spotlight, but also ensure that they're well defined, looking at the metadata. Is it a percentage? Is it a number that you will count? How often will you collect this data? Who is responsible to collect the data? And that sort of thing, and ensuring that this is consistent across all agencies. Next slide, please. Data availability. Lack of sufficient and relevant data on some specific outcome areas. For example, the one that looks at 4.1, it's very difficult to be able to measure progress. And so maybe there can be some sort of assessment at some of the indicators, and whether or not there is a way to strengthen those indicators to ensure that the data do exist. So the recommendation here would be to advocate with key stakeholders to collect and disaggregate comprehensive and reliable data as it relates to violence against women and girls and the services. Ensure that sensitive data is collected directly from right holders and is accompanied by specialist training and approaches in order to confirm to safety and ethical protocols and best practices. As we know, some of the data, while you might want it and you might think that it's necessary, some of the data around violence against women and girls are very sensitive. And so you have to ensure that the necessary protocols are in place to ensure that the data is reliable, but not only that, that we do not violate and do no harm as we collect this data. Next slide. Looking at the legislation and policy, as mentioned earlier, there is no specific legislation in place to address the full scope of violence against women. We have said that over and over. And so this should be one of the strongest advocacy and a more coordinated effort to be able to look at integrating the plans in terms of what we look at for health, what is in the police, what to ensure that there is that harmonization and coordination within those policies. So that is one of the key advocacy that is recommended by our consultant. Next slide, please. Okay, again, a policy, the Belize Equal Opportunity Bill of 2020. We do have that, looking at anti-discrimination in Belize. However, as you know, what was some of the constraints that we had with this bill, and so the bill was actually withdrawn in September, as you all know. And so then again here, there should be stronger advocacy to ensure that this bill again is put on the table. However, before putting it on the table, there has to be significant dialogue and sensitization among parties, including the religious sector, to be able, so that the bill is clear, and so it can be passed. Next slide, please. Looking at monitoring and reporting, again, if you would think that I'm very biased in terms of data and having the mechanism to be able to report. But we noticed that there is a detailed review by the baseline assessment team on national plans of action to end violence against women and girls that respond to the rights of all women and girls. We did not find evidence that they are supported by M&E frameworks. We've mentioned this already, that those are not supported by solid M&E frameworks, and most of the time, the budget doesn't exist to ensure the consistent monitoring. Resources, while we do need data, one of the things we need to consider is that data collection is a costly endeavor, and so there has to be that in our planning. We must plan for M&E, and it's not only to build a framework, but it's also to ensure that the resources are there to be able to move that framework. And so this is one of our advocacy to ensure that that exists. Next slide, please. I think we're at the end. Thank you. If there are any questions or concerns, go right ahead. I think I'm within the time, Tracy.
Thanks very much, Paulette and Tracy.
Thank you very much, Paulette, for that very detailed and comprehensive presentation. I know that our participants may have specific questions that they may wish to field, but I also recognize that the agenda has been organized in a way where there is a group exercise that would allow for participants to address any specific questions that they may have within that wider context of the group discussions. So keeping us on track with the agenda that was organized for this morning's launch, I would like to invite Shirlene Tablada, or Technical Coherence Consultant, to provide a brief overview of how the outcomes and the recommendations of the baseline study is aligned to several other initiatives that are ongoing in the context of the Spotlight Initiative program. So I hand over to Shirlene to walk us through on these important linkages. Shirlene, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Protocol being established, I'd like to move right into my presentation. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for that lovely introduction. It does not do justice, that picture does not do justice to my current image, but it surely shows that things and times have changed. Very grateful for presentations like these on the findings of the baseline study, because it does help us a lot to understand how far we have come, and it motivates us to continue to work together to address those gaps identified. As many of you are well aware, there is a lot of work being done. Many of us, actually everybody who is sitting in this meeting and presentation today is busy almost 24/7 responding responding to family violence. And so we're evidence that a lot of work has been done by government and civil society partners. And as you're well aware, in 2019, the government of Belize, representatives from the government of Belize, civil society partners, the UN partners, with input from the EU, technically, work closely to design Spotlight intervention. And I speak with excitement about it because all the way back in 2019, I was right there sitting at the table when Spotlight was being designed, and we have worked together even more closely over almost 2 years, government, civil society, UN partners, and the EU, to address many of the critical gaps that Paulette just identified in the baseline study report. And so it's evidence that work is ongoing, and although gaps are identified on the baseline study highlight things that we should ensure that we challenge ourselves to continue to intervene and improve the situation, there are many critical interventions that are happening right now as it relates to Spotlight that all of us around here must be proud of. And so what I want to do in the next few minutes given to me is to highlight how already some of those gaps are being addressed through these interventions, through the partnership that is here today. And so we have been working with government and CSOs, the UN partners, and the EU to address these gaps. As it relates to policy and legislation and some of the gaps identified in the baseline study, we have on the table right now a draft national gender policy that was revised to reflect the current realities and challenges and issues that need to be addressed where gender is concerned. We have also on the table for approval a national gender-based violence action plan that has been updated, it's costed, and it has a robust M&E framework, which if properly implemented should help with some of the things that Paulette has recommended as it relates to data and evidence and M&E. And so we're happy that already you see a response to some of those gaps. As it relates to legislation, again, when it comes to the Domestic Violence Act, although there are no plans within phase 1 of Spotlight to address gaps within the Domestic Violence Act, what is happening is there's a lot of work that is ongoing with communities, with survivors, with stakeholders to speak on the Domestic Violence Act, to generate recommendations for how these pieces of legislation can be strengthened. And so it's critical to put things like these on the table for a phase 2, because Spotlight working across communities is already looking at how to strengthen pieces of legislation like the Domestic Violence Act. Within the security forces, there's already a joint sexual violence prevention and response. We know that this was an area of concern where constant cases were being reported across the security forces, but Spotlight has been able to respond in this manner and support the security forces now with ensuring that there are programs, policies, and protocols in place to address violence against women and girls within the security forces. As it relates to service provision, next slide, please. As it relates to institutional strengthening, the National Women's Commission has been really at the forefront and must be commended for the strong partnership with the Spotlight team and the strong leadership, along with key line ministries and the CSOs. And we keep mentioning civil society because civil society has been an integral part of this process. One of the areas that continue to be flagged is access to justice. And we're really pleased to announce that through Spotlight, court officials and magistrates have been engaged in a process of capacity building and mentorship that is ongoing to be able to engage in dialogue and identify those critical areas where capacity can be addressed and where services can be improved. And in the public and private sector, we're looking at how do you challenge those gender norms within the workplace to change that culture of violence against women and girls at all levels, both within the private and public sector. As it relates to prevention, we're really excited, next slide please, we're really excited about the work that we're doing, and we must say that a lot of the work in prevention is from the ground up and led by grassroots organization and civil society organization. And this work is critical because it's around increasing knowledge, it's around changing attitudes and practices, and more importantly, it's about challenging critical social and gender norms which we we know to be the root causes of family violence. Working with individuals, with communities, with schools and service providers across the ecology to try and ensure that in fact we are hitting where it needs to be. And so their schools, young people have been engaged in and out of school and are trained as master trainers, and they are replicating this to additional young persons. I see Pathlight is here, and there's been a strong partnership with Pathlight and the Ministry of Education, where over 1,000 teachers and local managers have been trained, and this work is going to be expanded. Spotlight has reached over 6,000 persons at the community level through programs that focus on empowerment, protection, prevention of family violence and girls. And this is really, really critical because I noticed in the baseline study presentation, Paulette talked about how there was just such a small number of persons that said that they were aware of community interventions. And so it is good to see that through Spotlight, a lot of this has been increased and amplified so that access to information at the community level has been increased. And we all know the critical role of parents in socialization. And so Spotlight is really happy to share that almost 2,000 parents in 94 communities have been reached with information and violence prevention strategies. And I just want to pause here for us to share a short video to show how the work that Spotlight is doing on the ground in communities is helping to increase access to information, which translates to an increased access to services. So I'll pause as we share this video with you.
My husband is an alcoholic, I would say, because he loves to drink. He sometimes takes 5 to 13 days drinking. One time he came drunk, he beat me, he chased me from home. I had to come out from home late that night. The other day, I went to make my report because I was afraid that he would come one day and beat me in front of my kids and actually kill me. I went with a lady for refuge because I have heard about houses they give protection for kids and for women who are passing this type of abuse. I went with this lady, I stayed overnight, they treated me and my kids.
Casa de Dorcas es un centro de costura. Las personas que ayudamos aquí son mujeres de bajos recursos, mujeres que son abusadas en abuso doméstico, y aún las que vienen aquí de la comunidad son mujeres que están viviendo abusos, y las que vienen a quedarse aquí en el shelters, en el albergue, son mujeres que el departamento trae cuando ellos necesitan un lugar para poner a alguien que necesita refugio. A las mujeres de la comunidad las equipamos con costura, con tejidos, con bordados. Nosotros les enseñamos, ustedes lo están aprendiendo y son ustedes voluntarias, entonces eso también les va a ayudar a ustedes para poder ayudar a las mujeres que van a venir aquí más adelante. Ese es uno de nuestras metas, poder equiparlas con herramientas que les pueda servir cuando ellas salgan de acá. El apoyo que hemos recibido nosotros es que pues nos han invitado a entrenamientos acerca de abusos de violencia doméstica, y a veces mando las mujeres de la comunidad a participar en esos entrenamientos que ellos ofrecen.
Our Women's Forum focused on domestic violence specifically, domestic violence and the law. but specifically we wanted people to understand what domestic violence is and how to access the necessary services that is available to them. We held these forums countrywide and we met well over 300 women. We chose specifically to engage women this way because we wanted to provide a safe space for women. We wanted women to understand that they're not alone in this situation. We wanted them to understand that there are other people who are experiencing domestic violence as well. We also chose this type of forum because we felt that it was very important for women to be engaged, and also men as well, and for them to have a better understanding of what the domestic violence situation is. To sustain this initiative, we also need stakeholders. We need gatekeepers. We need people who have access to the community. So we need engagement at all levels, whether that be community leaders, whether that be the police department, whether that need advocacy agencies. We need all those stakeholders to be involved in the process. So in order to ensure that no one is left behind. One of the main goals as well is to have people feel safe, that people who are experiencing domestic violence, they need to know that there is a safe space for them. They need to know that they will not feel re-victimized if they need to access. And they also need to be reassured that they will be protected as well by the necessary measures that are in place for them. So those are one of the goals to push and keep this initiative going forward.
Thank you so much, Perla, for that video. As you can see, the focus is on prevention here, and we are very cognizant of the fact that the more women, girls, men and boys are aware of the services that are available, the more likely that they will access the services. We have additionally been working with faith-based leaders and community leaders as it relates to family violence prevention, and really trying to build capacity and increase information. Through that means a family violence toolkit has been developed, and this is going to help with sustainability because the kit can be replicated across organizations. Additionally, there's been work with couples, whereby couples in 2 specific geographic areas have been trained, because we know that the focus on communication in relationships to even look at prevention and averting possible violence within relationships is also something that is key. And also very important, one of the things that we have been doing in partnership, of course, with government, civil society, is looking at how to engage men and boys and strengthening our approach to engaging men and boys. So far, 350 men have been engaged in the 1.5 years that we have been working. But in addition to that, over 6,000 persons have been reached through public awareness. And in this way, trying to address some of the critical gender norms that are at the root cause as it relates to family violence. In this regard, we want to pause to share a short 2-minute video on engaging men and boys.
The truth is, when the invitation was extended, I was excited. Generally, I like to volunteer. I like to take an active approach in being a part of the solution. It was a welcome opportunity simply because whilst we talk a good talk with respect to achieving gender equality in the workplace, this was another opportunity for me to be a part of that movement, be a part of that discussion. I like to be reminded that we have other people who are willing to bring the issues to the forefront. And in attending the Engaging Men and Boys Workplace Training session, that is what I took away. We have male figures, male role models, successful males in our society who are no longer willing to subscribe to the archaic, patriarchal, solely male-dominated way of living, but to understand that we are equals. Even here in the magistracy, it's the same. We have an all-star female cast leading the judiciary for the first time in the history of Belize. And it's welcoming, it's eye-opening, it's refreshing. My biggest takeaway is, whilst we have come a long way, we still have a longer way to go. But I'm comforted by the fact that I was not the only driven male in that discussion. And to hear like-minded males speak on the issue, to hear that passion, it comforts me knowing that we do have a way forward, assisted by men. But I wouldn't want to think that 10 years from now we'll be having the same discussion. It shouldn't be.
Thank you very much again for that video, Perla. As you can see, it's early work, but definitely the men that are involved, they are very engaged, they're very enthusiastic. The spaces are provided for critical reflection on gender norms and to really examine the status quo at the moment and look at how they can influence other men and expand the program. So we're looking very much forward to expanding this intervention within phase 2 of Spotlight. As it relates to service delivery, this is something that is also critical in terms of trying to ensure that we're improving access to services for survivors of family violence. And some of the key things that we have been able to achieve through this partnership is defining of an essential service package for Belize to ensure that at least we're able to commit and be held accountable as a country for a basic package of service that every survivor of family violence can be guaranteed would be delivered to them. We were also able to support the drafting of multi-sectoral protocols on sexual violence. This is very important because a lot of times the protocols are lacking for how multiple sectors operate and coordinate with each other. One of the other key things as it relates to strengthening service delivery has been the design and rollout of a mobile women's center, which we will feature shortly. But the critical thing about the Mobile Women's Center is that it's a very, very promising and encouraging model for how you try to work in a coordinated fashion to bring services to communities and how CSOs can help to bridge some of the gaps that government cannot support at the community level in partnership, of course, with the government. And then, of course, there's work to establish a sexual and domestic violence within the police department. From the data, we can see very clearly that police is the first line of response and that there's more confidence and likelihood that persons would report to the police, And so if we're able to strengthen this critical first response as it relates to the services that are available, then we're on the right track to supporting service delivery as it relates to violence against women and girls. And so at this time, we want to share this very promising work that has been happening with the Mobile Women's Center, particularly because it's increasing access to those hardest to reach communities, which is at the core of what we're trying to do with Spotlight.
The Mobile Women's Centers fall within the service provision priority area of the Spotlight initiative. It was envisioned that high-quality essential services, which are comprised of health services, legal services, social services, and general information on gender-based violence, violence against women and girls, sexual and reproductive health, would be made available to persons in the communities.
We at Power support the coordination of the Mobile Women's Center as it relates to bringing the CSOs together and blending the mobilization of the community with this effort. For us as a community-based organization and also in talking with other community-based organizations that have been a part of this process, we believe that it is very, very important for us to come together, to network together, to be able to have this service be driven from the ground up, so to speak. because I think as community-based organization, we all have a unique view of what is happening in the community. And so the ability to take that bottom-up approach is very vital and necessary, because it is more reflective of what actions the community deems as important.
Usually it's cancer screening. We do their breast exam, pap smear. We find out if anybody is on contraceptives and want to be on a contraceptive. We follow up with basic gender-based violence issue, finding out, because some people might not realize that they're going through gender-based violence because it always seems to be physical for them, when it's also emotional and psychological as well, no? Most of them are usually regularly checkups. We will find people now and again that is like maybe 50, 51 and haven't had a pap smear at all in their life, right? And we try to encourage them to do the pap smear because it is very important, because here in Belize, cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer is one of the leading causes of death. We usually would do follow-up because we have things that we try to get information about, like gender-based violence, for example. And so if we provide basic counseling, but if we see the need for referrals, then we do the necessary referrals and follow through, making sure that the person reach where we send them. It's good to carry the service to the community because most people cannot afford to even travel to do their services, so they won't look at their health. That wouldn't be the first thing on their mind, but bringing it to their home, then you will see that they will access it a lot. And I like when people partner together to provide services for people in these rural communities. We find out that clients that follow through, they keep telling us, well, nurse, thank you, because I have been to the doctor and now I'm doing well.
At the mobile women centers, we will mostly provide legal services, legal assistance, primarily anything that has to do with legal advice, legal education is mainly what we offer to these mobile centers. Based on districts, there are varying levels of issues, and so we are able to have insight through these mobiles about the different issues, and they would range from land issues, domestic disputes, a lot of divorce issues, and a lot of many of the issues that we notice is that there is not a lot of legal education, whereas people are not aware or understand, I would say, how the legal system works in Belize. We are aware that, well, legal services are not cheap, I would be fair enough to say, in our country. And so the accessibility is a very important, very vital part of these clinics. And so, like I mentioned, apart from the insight reaching out to these individuals, it's something that we can offer to people that would otherwise not have access to,
We offer psychosocial support to women and children who have been victims of gender-based violence. In these areas especially, a lot of people, it's not their culture to talk about abuse or to talk about what's going on in the home. So when we come in and we let them know that it's okay to talk about it, it's okay to get help, then we empower our entire family, and that family is now a healthy family unit as opposed to an unhealthy family unit that we would have met when we first came in. We had success stories where the entire family got support and that entire family became a stronger unit and the abuse stopped. We've had victims that came in that, their identity was that of what the abuser had told them it was. And so they didn't feel like they could go to school, they didn't feel like they could get a job, they didn't feel like they were worth anything, right? And so we've had clients that now have jobs, that now are going back to school, that are more empowered. We've also had success stories in a girls group that was created. It's a small girls group for young women who have been through abuse, who now know that they're not the only ones, because a lot of times when young girls go through abuse, they feel like, oh, well, I'm the only one that has been through this, but now they know that I'm not the only one, and other young girls have been through this as well. But from that, we've seen these girls now go out and tell their story and empower other young women, because they've found their identity again, and they know who they are outside of that abuse.
Thank you so much for that video. As you can see, it's a bit lengthy, but it's one of those things that have really been a success. And here we're able to demonstrate the strength of partnerships on the ground and how the impact has been so far reaching for these women. And so we're really happy to be able to showcase that already as one of the interventions that Spotlight is implementing to respond to some of the gaps in the baseline. As it relates to outcome 6, we can see where data and evidence is concerned. And again, this was one of the areas that the presentation stayed long on as it relates to the baseline study findings. The baseline study itself that has been launched today is evidence that we're collecting data and we're documenting the situation to inform the response, so that moving forward, whatever we do is informed by evidence. There is a program ongoing with the Ministry of Human Development to strengthen farm care, so that robust data is available as it relates to cases that are being reported and how those are being managed. And as it relates to access to justice, there is the upgrading of the court case management system underway to ensure that the data is better managed and we're able to utilize the data for decision making and to keep the system accountable. And finally, I highlighted throughout the presentation, next slide please, that there has been a robust partnership with CSOs. This continues to happen, and there are some very specific interventions where partnership with CSO networks are ongoing to look at, beyond working with individual CSOs, how can we strengthen networks of CSOs so that beyond Spotlight, there are these robust and very active CSOs with strong capacity to continue the response and to work alongside government in implementing intervention. Also, as it relates to the Human Rights Commission of Belize, because you know that what underpins Spotlight is a human rights-based response. And so working very closely with the Human Rights Commission of Belize to strengthen their capacity and reach. Also looking at the grassroots, because a lot of times what we're not cognizant of is that there are lots of grassroots women's movement at the community level with limited access to information and resources, but a very strong will to do something and to respond as it relates to violence against women and girls. And so we're working with the Belize Association of Planners to work with those organizations to identify them and to build capacity among these grassroots women organizations, as well as working with the Civil Society National Reference Group. We have the chair of that reference group here, but we have long recognized the more we can build capacity of civil society and help them to work independently to strengthen the response at the community and the national level, the more successful our interventions would be. And so in a nutshell, what I'm highlighting here across these slides is that this is work that has yielded much success over the last 2 years. And it is really important to highlight that this is only possible through the partnership between the UN, the government of Belize, civil society, and the EU. And it's a demonstration that partnership is what is necessary, strong partnerships to be able to realize our goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlene, for really showing the importance of the data that was presented earlier for the baseline survey that was completed and how it contributes and links to many other initiatives and activities ongoing in the context of the Spotlight Initiative program. Now, I know colleagues and participants, we initially had programmed to do a group exercise, to hear some specific reflections and your thoughts around the data that was presented today. But being very mindful of the time, we would like to open for just an open plenary discussion that would allow for you to share your questions, if you have specific questions that you may wish to raise, as well as to share with us your initial thoughts around the data that was presented today. I don't know if my colleagues, Perla, if you would have those questions here up front, and perhaps we can use the next 10 minutes in order to have your thoughts there. In the chat, you will notice that there is a link that has been placed for you to share your inputs in writing on a Jamboard, a collaborative platform. You may also wish to put your questions directly in the chat or go to the reactions button and raise your hand in order to ask for the floor so that you can be given a space to share your questions. My colleagues and the entire team, the Spotlight team, would be available to address any specific questions that may be placed. Charlene is here online. We have Paulette Wade, who did the presentation earlier, and other members of the Spotlight team. I don't see any immediate questions on the chat window, so perhaps I would go look at the first question that we had on the slide, the first slide that was placed up. Does the data reveal new information about the changing context of our beneficiaries? And does the data require us to shift certain assumptions or analysis of the vulnerability of beneficiaries? For those who are able to access the link that was shared in the chat, you can do so and type your feedback on one of the sticky notes that appear in front on the slide, or you can also share your intervention directly in open plenary now. And I know that Ambassador Van Steen is needing to depart the meeting. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us this morning and for staying online. We look forward to continuing the partnership and engaging with you in the context of the program and necessary follow-up.
Hello, everyone. Just so you know, when you go on Jamboard, you can double click on one of the sticky notes and be able to type in your feedback in the sticky note. So you double click on the sticky note and type your feedback. There we go. We have one person already responding there. There's a question on this Jamboard.
Thank you, Carla, for helping us to manage the collaborative platform on Jamboard. And I see the question being posted is emphasis was placed on the Mayan community during the presentation by Ms. Wade. Are there any reflections on other closely knit communities with cultural traditions in Belize, such as the Mennonites? I will ask my colleague Paulette if she would wish to share any immediate reaction on that question in the context of the baseline study and the data that was captured from the respondents to the survey.
Okay.
You would wish to touch on this. Over to you,
Yes,
Paulette.
very good. While as much as possible, we try to ensure that all communities participated. In terms of ethnicity, we only had Mestizo / Hispanic, Creole, Mayan, Garifuna, East Indians. There were four respondents who indicated as other. There were 78 who were mixed, 4 who were Caucasian, and 1 person identifying themselves as Asian. There was no respondent that were of Mennonite descent or ethnicity.
Thank you, Paulette, for responding on that question.
Tracy, if I could just add very quickly to that discourse, indeed, one of the things that has been a challenge is definitely engaging, just as an example, those communities such as the Mennonite community. However, through Spotlight in terms of engaging faith-based and community organization in implementing the family violence toolkit, we have achieved some breakthrough in terms of engagement of the Mennonite community, particularly the community in Spanish Lookout. And indeed, there has been many cases of violence reported, and now the social worker from that district are involved. It's a very delicate relationship, we have to say, and so it's really important to manage it well, but yet, of course, bearing in mind the responsibilities for mandatory reporting. And so Spotlight is working very closely with the CSO and government partner in that area. And so there's a lot that we would be able to glean from the interactions with this community in order to help us to further strengthen programs within those areas. So we're happy to report that.
Charlene, would it be the baseline assessment report?
No, definitely. I'm saying that the baseline assessment report would not have captured that. But when you think of Spotlight overall, this is one of the areas that we would be able to contribute to further data in the near future as it relates to insights into those populations that we have not traditionally been able to get information from.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks. Thanks, Charlene, for touching on that point, because I'm seeing another comment on the Jamboard that perhaps data could be collected based on age group. And I believe that there was disaggregation of the data by age. Perhaps Paulette did not drill down on it, but may wish to touch on it now. Targeting ideologies on gender-based violence, women's rights, gender equity, and the role of women in the home. I recognize that comment there on the board. As well, there is another comment or a question that yes, the data reveals that more men and boys are interested, more men and boys' interest in this might have increased over time. However, shifting assumptions on certain female target groups where past perceptions on women's role is still lingering, and perhaps how that might be changing is the question that the participant is pointing to. Would the colleagues, you wish to share any thoughts around this?
Tracy, I don't know if the report, the assessment can be shared. It's only tables, no narrative. Maybe it could be placed in an online portal or something that people can access it. The age range of persons were actually divided as below 25, below 20, which was it's only up to 18. So we already know we're only talking about persons who are 18, 19, and 20, and then you have 20 to 25, and then above 25. That's how the data was aggregated.
Thank you so much, Paulette. And I believe that the report would be made publicly available through or website and other distribution means for participants to be able to access. I see other comments. Yes, thank you so much, Perla, for noting it in the chat that it will be available on our website, the United Nations website. So moving along, perhaps we can go to the second set of, the second Jamboard, the second slide, where the question was, does the data reveal any persistent challenges or issues that require additional mitigating strategies? To what extent, as participants, you feel that there are other strategic action or issues that should be targeted based on what the data has revealed that was presented this morning? If you have any thoughts or reflections on that question, please feel free to add them to the discussion board. And while you're thinking about that question, I would also slide through Perla to the next question, which was the last, I believe, that looked at how will we use this data to inform and shape future planning of programs and interventions for beneficiaries. Here, we really want to hear from you around your own thoughts and ideas of how the data should help to inform future activities and programs that seek to address violence against women and girls and violence within the communities and within the homes, how it is manifested in various ways. So please feel free to enter your comments there on the Jamboard or your suggestion and recommendations if you don't wish to share it openly in the meeting at this time. I see we have a few more minutes. I would say we take 2 more minutes to collect any initial feedback. I take note that some participants are departing due to other commitments, and we do apologize for running a bit over schedule, but nonetheless, find it important to receive your input. And I see
a hand up, Tracy.
Sorry?
There's a hand up.
Okay, I'm not able to see that on my screen.
Hi, good afternoon.
Please go ahead, Glenroy Furman. You have the floor.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everybody. So I've been listening since the beginning this morning, and I am a member of the security forces. So I was more in tune to that part. I was listening to the overall part of the entire presentation. However, I am pleased to see that the security forces, since now we have had a lot of cases that have been reported, and I think that is something that must need to be followed through. And I think it's at the higher levels that these mediation needs to be done. And I think that with that, the help should be able to, these interventions should be able to help and trickle down. So everybody down to the lowest rank and files in these departments, or files and rank in these departments, would be able to know, because we have had many cases in terms of listening to police officers, policemen and women, soldiers, Coast Guard, where they shift from being that person in uniform to go home and try to be that father figure, that friend, that husband, that brother. It is a bit challenging for some of these people to make that shift. And so it's like living one lifestyle at work and living the other lifestyle at home. And so that makes it a bit challenging. And I think with more people, more advocacy program or more intervention like these, where these leaders would be able to bring in people from these different ministries or people from these different organizations to have a session with these soldiers or with these policemen and Coast Guard, that will help them to be able to better transform from being that person in uniform to go home and try to be that person, the dad, the father figure, the brother and everything. Because we know that especially in this pandemic time that we're going now, everybody has a different mindset as to what it is that their roles are as a law enforcement officer. And so it becomes challenging at times listening to these people talking, for them to go home and try to play that role as the husband that they need to play or the father figure that they need to play. So it is good to see that some data has been collected. I think there is more that will be done, but it is something that definitely needs to be followed through. And I think that in doing that, the men and boys who are also trying to engage in this program should be reached out to as often as possible, because there indeed has a big role to play in the abuse of women and children. So if it starts at home, we know that they said it takes a village to raise a child. So these are things that, again, I applaud the intervention that has been done and the data that has been collected, but it is something that needs to be followed through. And it also needs to be followed through from the highest level in these organizations, so that everybody within these departments are able to make that shift and know that, there's somebody out there who I can speak to, somebody who is listening, and at the end of the day, they will have that kind of trust to say they can always go to their leaders and tell them exactly how it is they are feeling, because it is very important. These things are true, they are real, and it's happening every day within these uniformed security forces. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Furman, for sharing your experience of the need for really changing the behaviors and attitudes within the security forces, and how violence is viewed. I do recognize the comment that was placed in the chat from the National Women's Commission, or the executive director, on work that has initiated and will continue to take place to support the security forces in addressing this important issue. So I take note of some additional comments that were shared on the board. One that looks at how the program can directly target girls ages 10 to 14, prepubescent girls entering into vulnerable relationships, body changing, key transitional time for girls to womanhood might be an area of interest to collect data and see where interventions at this age could be provided. That's a very important suggestion and recommendation, which will be taken into account and fully noted. I see a second comment there that certainly more work could be done with schools, especially with educators who may find themselves survivors of gender-based violence. We do not see much work being done or data being collected to target women who work directly with children in schools. Again, the comment is noted, and I don't know if anyone from the team may wish to share any thoughts on that. But let me just make note of the two additional feedback. I saw Perla on the next slide. There is, I think, a comment here around how we can review interventions that exceeded success indicators and see how these projects or programs could be expanded consistently and comprehensively. So where things are working well, how could they continue to be scaled up? How could they continue to expand for the benefit of those that are specifically targeted? And then the second comment there is analysis of programs or actions that had lower success rates should also be analyzed to make the necessary adjustments to increase participation and success. Yes, very valid comment, because the process of collecting data is also a process of learning that it shows us where there is need for improvement or more targeted action. And so colleagues, I ask if you have any additional comments to share Charlene or Paulette, you would wish to share any additional thoughts before we close off this plenary session and really go into closing off our session for today?
Tracy, on the program side, and then Paulette can probably make a comment or two on the baseline side. But before I do that, Honorable Dolores is saying she would like to ask a question, so I would give her the space.
Yes, I recognize the
thank you.
Minister. Please
Thank
go
you.
ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. On the pillar 5 of the data and evidence, I noticed that we said that you have these agencies, the Belize Police Department's Sexual Offenses Statistics, and then the Ministry of Health's Gender-Based Violence Surveillance System. So we have Police and Ministry of Health, and then the Belize Crime Observatory. But it goes on to say that there is a lack of clarity on how these different systems cooperate, who is responsible for data input, the quality of the data, and whether the data is updated consistently. Well, my question is, are we able to address that? I remember I spoke in my opening remarks about the meeting we had on trafficking in persons to try to get all the agencies to really collaborate, well, to collaborate more and better and stronger. So I would like to ask whether we are able to address that issue of those three entities in terms of who's responsible for the data, etc.
Oh, awesome. You would see my hand shut up as soon as you started to ask Honorable Valderramos Garcia, and I feel like I got Spotlight got an early Christmas present just by you asking that question, and clearly in what you're saying, demonstrating that you also see this as really important. This is one of those Spotlight activities that are planned, and we cannot say has been met with tremendous success as yet. As a matter of fact, as it relates to collecting data, the one that is readily available is the reports to the police. And so we know for a fact that even as we report numbers, it's not an accurate reflection of what the true picture is as it relates to gender-based violence. And so one of the struggles has been to find a way to look at the country agreeing on one uniform system. We cannot really fight if it is that the various service providers, for obvious reasons, need to have their unique system where they capture data, etc. But what the country has not agreed in is how we feed in to one system that data that is being collected by these various entities to ensure that we are able to capture a comprehensive picture and be able to make national decisions. And so this is one thing that we have been advocating strongly for, but have not met with much success. And so this would be some of the one thing that in moving to a phase 2, we would really want some attention and support with in bringing together the relevant stakeholders to talk about what is possible and how this one system can work and what adjustments the unique systems that exist would need to adopt in order to make sure that this is possible and feasible. So thank you very much for that input and question. And Paulette might very well have something to add on that very important point.
I was just going to ask the same question, if Paulette had any comments that she would like to add in response to the minister's question.
I see Dylan also sending some comments as it relates to the data. I do feel that one of our strongest efforts should be in terms of ensuring that there is a integrated or a one-stop shop for data. And I'm not only talking about gender-based violence data, I'm talking about data across all sectors, not only in terms of protection, but education. One of the things we struggle with is always to be able to tell the story. And as we craft our new the multi-country development framework, one of the key pillars there is the LNNOB, that little one that keeps tying my tongue, leave no one behind. And so whether we're talking about tips, whether we're talking about violence against girls, one of the key mechanisms that we need is to ensure that there is a one-stop place for data collection and data sharing. However, there also have to be a mechanism for coordination, because it does take a coordinated effort to be able to not only collect data, because the data itself just tell us whether or not we're on track or off track, but we also need to ensure that the efforts, because ultimately our goal is to leave no one behind. And so we have to ensure that what we put in place, that we are monitoring, we're not only monitoring in terms of at the national level, looking at these national data systems in health, in human development, but also within the smaller agencies, the CSOs, that we put support them in ensuring that these mechanisms exist for monitoring, so that it can feed into the larger picture as we try to close the gaps and leave no one behind.
Thank you so much, Paulette. And I saw Cynthia had her hand up earlier, Cynthia Williams. I don't know, Cynthia, if you wish to share a comment, or that was a legacy hand that was up before you typed in your comment on the chat, but just giving you the space before we wrap up here.
Hi, thanks, Tracy. Very quickly, I was going to write it in the chat, but I just wanted to kind of highlight the one of the things that I think definitely we need to look at, and I think Paulette has started talking about it, is not only the collection of the data, but also the dissemination of it. And I think the activity that the Ministry of Human Development is currently looking at, which it focuses on the aspect of strengthening data collection mechanism, is something that is very close to the role of the National Women's Commission. And earlier this year, we started discussions with the Statistical Institute of Belize to see how we can begin to also utilize their space to disseminate the data. And so it would definitely strengthen that area if we're able to identify and strengthen a data collection mechanism. And definitely there are spaces. There have been multiple discussions at least in the last 3 years to look at what are the things that need to be put in place and being able to really identify a way of how to include the multiple types of violence that we usually collect data on, and ensure that that is provided in a way that could be useful for policy recommendations and program development as well. So I think it's definitely an opportunity that we have at this moment to be able to bring the aspect of strengthening the data collection, but also the partnership in how do we disseminate it as well to the general public as well, not only the policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, because really the data can only be meaningful if it is made available and if it is utilized and socialized, not just, as you rightly pointed to, among policymakers, but also other users of the data. Colleagues, I know that my clock is reading 12:19 and we're well past our allocated time. And so I really want to thank you for those who have remained connected, for engaging with us for the launch of this baseline study today. And so to close off our session, I really want to invite now Ms. Alison Parker, the representative for UNICEF, to share with us remarks to lead us into the closing of our session. Do we have Alison online already?
Tracy, I believe Alison has been having some problems to log on. Maybe we can move to just closing. We just send her a note.
I see we're also joined by Birgit Gastenborg, our UN resident coordinator. We had remarks by Alison first and then by Birgit, but in the interest of moving ahead, and since we have exceeded our time, I will give the floor to Birgit to share closing remarks for us. Birgit, please go ahead.
Yes, first of all, apologies. I was the whole time here, but was somehow not visible, I was told. But I was listening to everything, and I'm very grateful for this meeting. No? And I want obviously to greet, first of all, our Honorable Minister Dolores Valderramos Garcia, the Minister of Human Development, Families, and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, And although not anymore present, but also the Ambassador Marine van Steen, the head of the EU delegation, Mrs. Melissa Suniga, Mrs. Cia Garcia Ramirez, all the CEOs who have accompanied us of the Ministry of Human Development, Families and Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Ministry of Rural Transformation, Community Development and Local Government, the Ministry of Youth, Sports and E-Governance, Ministry of Education, Culture and Technology, of Home Affairs and New Growth Industries, and all our UN colleagues, especially our UNICEF representative, Mrs. Alison Parker, the UNEP Deputy Representative, Mr. Ian King, Tisa Grant, the UNFPA Liaison Officer of the Sub-Regional Office for the Caribbean, and all other distinguished guests. I wish to send you really a warm greeting to all who have participated in this launch of the Spotlight Initiative Baseline Study today. We know data is always timely for us to take a step back and see what the evidence is showing to help sound decisions and policy support. And we also think that the power of data have to be effectively used to enhance lives. So policies should be targeted. Decisions should be looking at the most vulnerable. Resources should be given to who really needs it, and should be very concretely addressing needs of people, needs of institutions, to shape up their services, etc. Data also tell a story and show a clear picture of people's needs and experiences, of their perspectives, and also on how we should shape our services to the broader public. Statistics also show that our efforts are needed, and immediate actions is as important as ever. So, and I have to say, I really would like to echo the words of Minister Valderramos for action. Really doing the necessary things for eliminating violence against women and girls. And we saw that among the facts that the study presents, there is still a harsh reality behind. And some data that we found are nevertheless encouraging. Especially, I think there was progress made in terms of having all laws and policies on violence against women and girls in place to adequately respond to their rights. And we have an average of 85% of men and women in rural and urban communities recognizing the different forms of violence, and an average of 78% of men and women who are aware of one form of support services available to survivors are. This is not enough, but it's something that means the thematic issue, concern, is recognized by the broader public. I also would like to say that the strengthening of comprehensive data needs to continue guiding us in reaching better policies and measure most effectively the impact on the life of the most vulnerable women and girls. So it's not a one-time effort. I think it should be a continuous effort, and from time to time have such stake-taking efforts to say what are the data right now. So I see this data effort that we did in the baseline study as a start to get continuously well-designed and good data which help us to act. I also would like to give a short outlook on actions from our side. Therefore, I wish to mention that we are working in partnership with government ministries and civil society organizations in developing regulations for the cybercrime legislation, the criminal code to operationalize the sexual offenders registry, We are also in the process of developing a national capacity development plan and assisting some stakeholders in developing prevention and response programs on family violence. We are also providing comprehensive sexuality education for young people, carrying out community-based programs, and engaging men and boys to address gender norms, to embrace gender norms, I'm sorry. We are ensuring that adequate services are reaching the most vulnerable by supporting safe houses, as you saw in the video, with their standards, operating procedures, defining an essential package of services for Belize, and strengthening the case management for gender-based violence survivors. Additionally, we are harmonizing the gender-based violence information system and strengthening and supporting civil society organizations to better network and to build their capacities in delivering their services. In implementing the Spotlight Initiative, the UN system in Belize cherishes the meaningful partnership with the European Union, the government of Belize, and the civil society that exists, and is exceedingly important to maintain our pace in going towards a society where violence is effectively confronted and addressed. We are especially interested in building sustainability to maintain our joint efforts beyond Spotlight and after Spotlight finishes. From my function as resident coordinator to Thrive, this important program, and on behalf of the UN implementing agencies, which are UNICEF, UNDP, and UNFPA, I would like to thank all partners present here today for being a part of this socially important undertaking and having taken the time to participate in the launch of this baseline study. My special thanks also to those who invested efforts into the survey and made it a success. I commend UNICEF Belize as the agency that led in its coordination along with the members of the Baseline Technical Steering Committee and all others involved for their commitment and dedication to ensure the completion of the baseline study. We remain obviously committed to eliminating violence against women and girls in Belize. This is only a point in the agenda, which is very long and very hard to achieve. We are really trying to move forward. And we aim to do this not only through the Spotlight Initiative, but through all our programs and all our agencies, funds and programs. And this understanding of how we do development work, the UN needs to ensure that the role of women and girls in society can be fully deployed. Its potential being gender equality integrated in development, and therefore violence against women and girls must be socially banned and effectively addressed when it happens, because we all recognize the big effort, the big part, and the big success women can make in society, the big difference if they can live with their full potential, if they can live in peace, if they can live in harmony with their families, with their communities. And I think that is what we really like would see to happen. So development is not possible if we stay behind in terms of fighting against violence against women and girls in general, in families, in communities, etc. May you all use the data presented today to advocate for and design responses and actions that meet the needs of those who continue to face violence in all the forms within their families and communities. We hope really you can shape your services, your actions, looking at these data, looking at the experiences and the views of persons that have been presented very eloquently today during this meeting. I thank you really for your kind attention, and would like to assure that we are always standing with you to fight the violence against women and girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Birgit, for those words. And that brings us to the close of our session this morning. I know that my colleague Perla will be doing a photo capture, so I invite all remaining participants to kindly turn your camera on and really extend thanks for staying the last 2.5 hours with us this morning for this important presentation. Minister Balderramos, we really appreciate your time and effort dedicated to this in this meeting and your leadership. So we give colleagues a few more minutes for those who are readily available. And Perla, let us know when the photo capture has been completed so that
Okay, just
people
waiting
may
on
be
a
able to
few
depart.
more participants just to turn on their video. Great. So let's go 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Perla, and thanks everyone. Wishing you all a good rest of the day, and please look out to access the full baseline report from our website, and as participants you would receive links to other communication products that were shared in the meeting today. I wish you a pleasant rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, Birgit, for joining us. Thanks, Tracy, for moderation. Of course, a heartfelt thank you to the minister, everyone present, and we appreciate it indeed. We'll sign out whenever everyone sign out.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Perla. Thanks, Steph.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right, you all can cut now.